And today we're going to talk a little bit about technology in the classroom. I mean, the topic I proposed for today's session was questions about why technology and how, and kind of like issues of why we need to bring technology to the classroom and how to do it. And Ian is one of the foremost experts right now in the field of digital technology in the classroom. So without further ado, Ian, we're all yours.
It's a many-layered problem. It's a many-layered challenge to bring tech into the classroom. My experience is I was a middle school and high school teacher. I used a lot of technology in the classroom, or better yet, I should say that I asked questions about why we were not using technology in the classroom. I was in an inner city or an at-risk school, and I had computers everywhere, technology everywhere. Computers, teachers had laptops they could carry around. We had giant, like 32 or 36 inch TVs in every classroom, and you could mirror up to the TV. And I dreamed about, and this was like 15 years ago, sadly, 15 years ago or more, I dreamed about, why can't I have my students do their writing and submit their writing to me and have a paperless system? And this was like before Google Docs and everything else. How can I make like a paperless system so my students can submit work to me, I can give them feedback, they can give each other feedback. And so I tried to think about how could I set that up, all pre-Google Docs and everything else. I also had a lot of, I looked through the building, and in other classrooms we had, the computer was either like a babysitter for my students, for other students, or the babysitter was, or the computer was covered up in trash bags and covered in dust. And so I started asking questions about like, well, why aren't we using these tools? And it was through a lot of different questions and answers that I ultimately quit my job teaching, and went off to get my Ph.D. and studied basically online reading comprehension and a lot of other stuff. And so I've spent probably a little bit too much time trying to figure out what this all means. And I, Raul said earlier that I'm an expert in this. I think it's basically just I've built and broken a lot of things online. And so it's the experience of messing up a lot of things that helps me out. So what are specific questions that we have so far, though?
Well, the thing is, as you know, we have this idea that we have to use technology and we have to use computers. But I want to start with the discussion of why. What's the point of bringing it? Because sometimes people bringing it, I don't think it does any good either. Yeah.
So one of the things that we often think about is there's a couple, we'll call them myths out there. There's a couple, I believe, I won't say lies, but I'll say, we have some misconceptions about technology use. One of them is that that certain people are digital natives. Basically, you are better at your use of technology because of your born on date. I think that that's a lie, that Mark Prensky and others told us that there are these digital natives out there. There's this belief that because of your age, you're more willing or more able or more skilled in your use of technology. With that same thinking, if I was born in the agricultural revolution, I would be better suited at running a plow or using a rake in my yard. It doesn't make any sense at all. I look at my son, who is in second grade, who is 7 years old. Do I think he's very good at technology? Yeah, I think he's pretty solid. Do I think it's because of his age? No, I think it's because he grows up in my house. He sees what I do. He sees me talking to the computer all the time. My son wants to have his own YouTube channel. I think it's because he sees me talking to my computer all the time. My son, I made stop motion movies with him when he was 3. I've played in Minecraft and coding with him when he was 4, 5, and 6. When I break computers and put them together and try and hack away at things, I involve him in the process. I do the same thing with my daughter, who's going to be 3 in 2 weeks now. And so I think he's a little bit more skilled in his use of technology than a lot of his peers. He's probably a lot more skilled in his use of technology than most of my students or colleagues. But I don't think it's because he's 7. I think it's because he sees this all the time. He watches YouTube. He plays. He's not afraid. So the one thing is the digital natives. I think it's an incorrect framing, we'll say. I have other words I could say, but since we're recording this, I'll keep it clean. I think that, I mean, that's part of the challenges. So the digital natives piece is, antiquated, and I think it's misguided. I think one of the other things that we see is our use of technology. There's this belief that if I use technology in my class, or if I use a technology in instruction, it's going to make instruction better, or it's going to make my students more motivated. We also know that to be a lie. If we're using technology and we are using it to modify student learning objectives or to improve the task, I think we can do great things. I think that we can, I had a post yesterday on my blog all about empowerment. I think we can change a lot of, we can right a lot of the wrongs on this planet through thoughtful use of technology, but I think just adding technology doesn't make things better. The one model that I use to think about this is the SAMR model. Have you guys talked about SAMR at all yet? The SAMR model, SAMR?
No.
Yeah, so the SAMR model, it's really interesting. If you've got a tab there open, I don't know if I can share my screen.
You should be able to.
So if I look at the SAMR model, let me see if I can share my screen. So one of the cool things I like about SAMR is, let me make sure everything's appropriate in my computer before I share the screen. Just kidding. All right, so if I share my, how do I do this? Share screen. Hey, how about I push the button that says share screen? All right. All right, so if I go online and I search for the SAMR model, there's a lot of different models out there to look at use of technology. The one that the ones that I subscribe to, one is TPAC, and I'll probably do some research and writing about TPAC. But one of the ones that I use in my class a lot is the SAMR model. So one of the things that I like about this is we're thinking about technology use, and we're thinking about how this is modifying and accentuating our use of technology. So one of the ways that I start my teachers and my colleagues too, but we'll stick with my teachers now, is I think about our use of tech and our integration of tech. And then I say, okay, are you primarily substituting technology in just for technology's sake? Or is my use of technology augmenting the task or augmenting my learning objective? And then I can move on down and say, okay, am I modifying the task or the learning objective, or am I redefining this? As an example, one of the things that I use in my classes is I have my students read for my classes. They don't like this. They really, really complain about it a lot, but I have them do it anyway. I had them use an open source annotation tool called Hypothesis to mark up and annotate as we read. So if you've used Poetry Genius or Lit Genius or Rap Genius, it's the same sort of tool where my students can mark up and annotate as they're reading for classes, and they can see what other people mark up and annotate. As I said before, my students hate that. They absolutely hate it. For one, some of my students like to have the hard copy paper out and mark up and annotate with highlighters. Other students, say they're doing the readings for the class, but they're not. And so this is a way for me to see if they're actually reading or not. And then some students just like the book. They like having a book in front of them, and they can only read if they have a book. So this is putting everything on the screen. That use of technology for the act of reading in my class, I asked students where this aligns on the SAMR model, and most of them say it's modifying, probably not redefining, but it's definitely modifying the task itself. It's redesigning how they read in class and the reasons by which they read in my class. It's not augmenting at all. It's definitely not a substitution, because it's a totally different world. It's a different use of reading. So when we think about technology integration or use of ed tech or digital text and tools in our classes, we want to think about, like, why are we using it? Are we really redefining the task? Are we doing something different? Or are we using technology for technology's sake? If we are, it's going to fall. It's going to fail. And we have to ask ourselves, like, why are we really doing this? Questions about that sort of stuff?
Guys, any questions so far? I don't have any questions for now.
Nothing yet?
Nothing yet.
But I mean, the challenge here too is, like, when we want to integrate tech in our class, Raul, what's everybody doing in that class? What are we studying to be? What's our backgrounds?
Okay, they are all language teachers.
Yeah.
Service teachers. They're working on language, and actually, right now, the backdrop to this, and that's why I really like the idea of the SAMR model, because we've been talking about material design in the class.
Yep.
Talking about the need for them to, like, look at them with whatever resources they have and evaluate them in order to either exploit them or adapt them, or if necessary, create materials. So I think the SAMR model fits very closely with that particular mindset of material design.
Yep. And I think I can also, one of the models that I'll share is one that really helps me. And I just found out that one of my colleagues does a lot of work in this. And so I might change my thinking over time. But one of the other models that I think about and I use is the TPAC model, which I can share more guidance on.
Yeah.
Have you guys read about TPAC before?
I don't think they have. So can you please explain?
Yeah, of course. So one of the things, so when we integrate technology into our class, we want to think about, why are we doing it? What opportunities does it provide for us? What learning opportunities does it provide for our students? We want to think about, how is it changing the task? Why are we using technology? If we're using technology for technology's sake, most times it'll fail. Another thing to keep in mind is that when we think about technology use in our classroom, it's not just the tools, it's not just the digital text and tools, it's also the practices associated with it. So, since we all studied language, we can understand the complexity of language. We can understand that language is not just the content, but it's also the social practices. It's also the ways in which we use it as a vehicle, or a tool to communicate with others. And there's a lot of other elements involved in it. Technology in many ways is the same thing, or educational and instructional technologies include the same elements. There's practices associated with our use of technology. There's different affordances of different technologies, meaning different things that the technology can allow us to do. And there's also strengths and weaknesses with our use of technology. One of the things that we may or may not talk about today is our use of technology. We have very real questions, and we need to have very real questions about the power structures behind our use of technology. One of the things I mean by that is, I spend a lot of my time using Google Apps and Google Apps for educators and Google Docs and Google Slides. I teach my kids how to use it all day, every day. The problem is that we're beginning to realize as a society that, you know, we told ourselves a lie up to this point that there was like this online digital side of us and this offline side of us. And we realize now that that's a lie, that these companies are just sucking up data about us all day, every day. We see it with the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica leaks and stuff like that. But we realize that these companies are really just tracking us and sucking up info about us all the time. One of the things that keeps me up at night is that by me teaching teachers how to use these apps in their classroom, I am feeding the beast. I am basically continuing this system in which I am having youngsters get online and they are tracked as well. So with language, with literacy, with these practices, we have to understand all the complexity of that. You know, and I think that as scholars of language, we understand that. We understand that there's practices associated with just the content. So we can't ignore that. And we should question that, and we should problematize it. And that's one of the reasons why I use open source tools now. That's one of the reasons why I blog and have a website. It's one of the reasons why I am an obnoxious academic. You know, that I try to push and question and problematize what we do. Questions before I dive into TPAC, because I know we're pretty deep already, and I'm only 10, 15 minutes in.
Remember, by the way, at any point you want to ask a question, all you have to do is stand up and hold it from the microphone, and that's it. The only thing you have to be sitting there, like,
and I wonder if there's a way that people can like type in questions and stuff like that, as opposed to, please don't tell me there's like a giant screen up in the front with like my giant head on the front of it.
No, there is. We can actually, yeah, we have the option, we have the chat option, so they could actually come and type the questions, if so they want. But these guys are confident enough to speak in front of a microphone. They did slam poetry. They can ask you questions.
You guys are doing slam poetry?
Yeah, this is the class I was actually this is the class I was doing the slam poetry project with.
So yesterday, so my slam poetry class is a bunch of freshmen at my institution, and we've been doing some cool stuff. And then so a bunch of my students in my class I figured no one would sign up for like a slam poetry class or a hip hop class. And then all of a sudden my class is packed, and I realized it's a bunch of like music majors and stuff like that. And so I go into class, and I'm teaching class, and they're popping and locking in the back, and they're dancing and hip hopping and singing and stuff. And I'm like, oh God, what did I get myself into? So now out of my class of like 25 kids, I have like a third that they're writing poetry. It's getting really deep. They're writing great stuff, but they just want to write a poem and write about their angst and their troubles in life. And then I got like a third of my kids, all freshmen, 18 years of age. A third of them, they're writing and they're exploring, and because I've created that culture in the classroom, they're more willing to like open up and share. And then I've got a third that want to be rap stars, and they think that they're rappers already. And so I said, okay, for the final project, we're going to stand up in front of an audience and we're going to present. And so I got a third that's like, okay, I want to stand up on stage and read my poem and walk off the stage and die. And then I've got like a middle third that they might want to do a poem and have like music underneath. And then a third that they want to be like the next Drake or Kanye, or Missy Elliott. And so yesterday in class, I shared, there's a video by Flocabulary talking about hip hop in the classroom and hip hop in education. That's excellent. And so we played that, and then we started talking about scat and Louis Armstrong and stuff like that. And then I started playing beats in my classroom, and we got in a circle, and we would basically play the beats, and we would all like just freestyle and spit and make sounds and scat. And it was great. Like all of us were expressing, even the kids that didn't want to. And then all of a sudden I had, Raul, I've got beats playing in my room. I've got kids freestyling and rapping. And then all of a sudden I have in my classroom, I don't know if it was the people underneath of me, but it wasn't on the one side. My other side was a colleague teaching math education. She just was laughing. I had people legit banging on the floor because my students were like too loud. I was like, I was like, I'm going to have somebody come in and be like banging on my door like a neighbor. Like, why? You're too loud. Keep it down.
Yeah, that happens, especially when you're when you're an English teacher, that's going to happen.
So now what they want me to do is they want me to rap at the final thing. And I know that is an ongoing discussion between the two of us. So I might have to write a rap and like sit there and try. No, I'm not the person on that video, but I might have to put together a video and try or stand in front of the group and try to rap. So
finally we're gonna find out who MC Lil is.
Hey, I've been trying to do it, but my students told me there's one or two in that class that can just rap. Like they can do it. And they told me that basically the key is you need to get out of your own head. They're like, we see you and you're trying to think through what to say and your mouth is not moving as fast as your brain. And they said, you just need to say things. You're gonna sound stupid. It's okay. Just sound stupid. And then after a while, you'll figure it out and you'll be able to just rap. So.
Oh, we're still talking about rapping. I thought for a second we're talking about teaching.
No, I still can't figure out how to teach.
Yeah, because I mean, when you say like, just stop saying it sounds stupid. Like, I don't know, that sounds like we started teaching. Same thing.
But I think the other thing is though, and it's one of the things to keep in mind is that I think there's a lot of parallels. I think there's a lot of things that we can learn from my silly little story about rapping. And that's, if you know pedagogy, if you know the science behind teaching and learning, and if you look at the digital texts and tools that are out there, what we need is we need teachers, we need educators to think about your content, think about good pedagogy and the theories and the perspectives behind it, and be willing to take a risk to try new things out. I think that there's a lot of times where, you know, we have a webinar and we bring somebody with a giant shaved head in on the screen and that person tells us use of technology. I don't subscribe to that. Like, I think that every single one of you, you know, most things that I know how to do, it's because I go to workshops and I talk to teachers that are trying new things and they're not afraid to fail. And they're willing, you know, they have the trust of their students, they have the trust of their colleagues, they have the trust of their bosses, and they trust themselves, and they're willing to try new things out. And they're willing to say, hey, I see this, you know, I see stop motion animation, or I see Snapchat, or I see Twitter, or I see, I guess, Facebook. But I see these different tools. I think there's a way that I could use that instructionally with my students. And it's that willingness to try new things, you know, to think about pedagogy, think about theories of teaching and learning and practice and assessment, and think about, okay, how could I integrate tech or try to integrate technology into that? Test it out, see what works, reflect on your practice, iterate, fail fast, and then learn from that and try new things. And I mean, that's the sort of thinking, that's the entrepreneurial thinking that we need. The problem is that, you know, I can speak about my own program. You know, I have students that are sitting in a pre-service teacher ed program, or, you know, I do workshops with teachers and they see the same thing over and over. And they're taught that this is the way that students learn. You know, I've been doing some research at my institution, and I suggested to my colleagues that they, in their online materials or their course materials in a college or a university, I suggested that they start adding more YouTube videos or webinars or simulations into their teaching materials. And I was told quite vehemently by colleagues that students don't like learning that way. Students prefer to read books and read text on paper or black print on white pages. And I was like, no, they don't. Like, that's not true. Like, a lot of students like having the YouTube videos and other ways to learn and other materials. And two or three colleagues got pretty combative with me when I brought that up. And I was like, all right, whatever. Like, I would hate being in your class. I would hate having you as an instructor. I'm not going to read your materials. You know, and that's the thinking, is that we had these antiquated thoughts about teaching and learning and pedagogy, and a lot of experts, you know, a lot of faculty, a lot of professors, a lot of K-12 teachers that have this mentality of like, this is how I learn, and so this is how you will learn. And I don't think that we're helping prepare students for their futures, because we don't know what the future is going to look like, and we're not helping prepare people if we keep doing the same thing.
These guys are, usually they ask a lot more questions. I don't know what happened to them today.
I thought I would pick a fight with that last statement.
No. Actually, what are your thoughts on that particular thing? Let's think about you, and let's bring a conversation. As students and as teachers, how do you see yourselves doing more? Like doing more of the reading videos and YouTube, or just doing the traditional reading? What is your position for that? Not everybody will be a riot. Will be shy. Be shy. What's your take on this? Because you're going to be teaching very soon. How are you gonna engage with them? Be shy. They don't want to talk today, man.
Everybody's all shy. It's because I'm scary looking.
Yeah, I know.
I look like Ming the Merciless. I want to see like Flash Gordon bashing through my window. So everybody's an undergrad, correct?
Yes, that's right.
So one of the interesting things there is that, you know, with my students, after I get to know them a little bit, I say, okay, you know, did your K-12 experience, you know, did your time in kindergarten, elementary, middle, high school, like did K-12, all the stuff before college, did that get you ready for now? You know, did your time back then prepare you for you sitting in this classroom right now? What do you all think?
That's a real question. Did your time in high school and elementary school prepare you for now? Be loud. No. Why not? Why did it not prepare you for now? What went wrong? You said no. Why not? Yeah, in my case, definitely the answer is no. But I mean, I'm talking about how I went to high school in the 1980s. So come on. But you said no, and you did it in the 2000s. What happened? What failed in your opinion? What was missing? Charles?
I guess the biggest part we were missing, I mean, at least me, back in the day, like, I remember that there was lack of confidence, because you gotta be confident when we're in a classroom. I mean, you're in front of a bunch of people. But still, I think the biggest problem for me was math class, because the teacher was like, okay, it's the board. And solve problems in the fastest amount of time you have, and pressure on because you had to finish them quickly. And she was like, at the end, if you didn't do it well, she would be like, oh, that's so bad. You got a 0 and you put a all. So you would get like slowly, little by little, and start to get them confident. And that's at least a really big problem for teaching, because you're like, okay, to stand in front of all these people
is an experience.
So it's all about like confidence and not building confidence over time, you know, as you were learning.
Yes, definitely.
I mean, that's the, and so one of the things that, you know, I think we can take away from that is we have a lot, I know it's totally different where all of you are located, but here in the US, we have a lot of complaints about K-12 teachers and higher ed instructors and institutions. A lot of business in the US and a lot of college say that the kids coming out of K-12, they're not prepared to do anything. That they're not qualified, they're not prepared to do anything, they can't think on their own, they're all like cookie cutters, you know, coming out. And then business complains about higher ed, about colleges and universities, and says the same thing, that students are leaving our program basically qualified to do nothing. That business needs to take them and train them and turn them into something. And I think that that's for several reasons. One is, and I have a post out there about this, I picked a fight with the International Literacy Association. But I think that we're not using technology in our classes. We're not authentically or effectively bringing tech into what we do. Every other part of our life has changed through the use of technology. You know, every other part in the 10 years since I was working on my dissertation, or the 15 years since I left teaching K-12, you know, here I am at home, I'm video conferencing in to spend a little bit of time talking to you all. But for the most part, the stuff that happens in my classroom, or the stuff that's happening in the middle school classroom down the street from me, that really hasn't changed at all. And so that's scary to think that in a decade, not much has changed. I think the other thing that's interesting about the motivation and the confidence and everything is now we're seeing a lot of work in grit and growth mindsets and reframing failure. And one of my own personal interests recently is all about divergent thinking as opposed to convergent thinking. But it's basically giving our students the opportunity to try something, reframe failure, think through what worked and what didn't work, and sort of like problem solve or think about new opportunities to readdress that problem. And so when you have that student in your classroom that fails, you know, failure is the F word that we often don't like to hear in our classroom. When you have a student that fails, you say to them, okay, what happened? What worked? What didn't work? The beauty of that is one way that we can practice those skills and those habits in our classroom, you know, is giving them opportunities to learn. We can have project-based learning where they explore their own interests. And then it's also bringing in, you know, coding and programming into our classroom. You know, coding and programming is not, in my opinion, it's not about making all kids coders. It's about, you know, I want my learners to know that the technology that's bringing me to you is not magic. There's not like a little magical fairy in my Apple MacBook right now. Steve Jobs is not flying around in my MacBook. He might be, but he's not flying around inside of my computer and like making these wires go together. It's code. The stuff that's making Facebook operate and stealing your data off Facebook, and the stuff that's doing your banking and bringing your cat videos to you, you know, that's not magic. It's not little gremlins or fairies in your computer. It's code that's bringing this stuff to your devices. And we need individuals in the future that can understand that it's not magic, that it is code, and that I can write that code. And coding and programming is all about rules. It's all about language, coding, and different computer code is they are different forms of language. And there's rules and structures, and there's algorithms, and there is a process to thinking through it. And when you learn how to code, part of learning how to code is that you are going to fail. You know, you're going to write a bit of code and hit in Scratch or, in code.org. You're going to write some code and then say, okay, hit run. And if it doesn't do what you want it to do, you have to go back and figure out what you did wrong and sort of rewrite that code and fix it and go back in and make sure that it runs appropriately. So it's all about reframing challenge and reframing failure and redirecting the learner. What about other people? Did your earlier teachers prepare you to sit in this classroom right now? Were you prepared to do whatever it is that you want to do in your future?
That is another question. Do you feel the past teachers have gotten you ready for what's going to happen? Yes, no, maybe, a little bit. What are your thoughts on that? Seriously, guys? So clever.
We need to go out for a walk. We need to get some coffee. We need to pep up this party.
Yeah, I guess. But I think you're raising a very important question. What is even? I'm thinking in the sense of my own work as a teacher educator is, are we really getting ready our students to go out there and do something actually not go back to the same? Because that's the flip side to it. I think that the flip side to this, we are proposing this idea, we're proposing this technology, but then how are we helping them go out there and start putting those things into practice when many of them are going to end up hitting a brick wall that is going to tell them, no, you have to go back to the curriculum.
Yeah. Because that's the challenge is if I ask all of you, are you prepared to sit in that seat? Or are you prepared for your future career? Or are you prepared to live in the future? One person said no, everyone else doesn't want to talk, but most of us say, no, I wasn't prepared to be here. And then we ask questions about why or who dropped the ball, and we don't really know. And the truth is that it's larger, systems in place. It's other things that are impacting us. If Raul and I sit and talk and be honest, like, no, we weren't prepared to be here. We were not prepared to do what we're doing. And then if this were a grad class, because I have grad classes, I say, okay, did K-12 prepare you? No. Did your undergraduate years prepare you? No, it didn't. And so the challenge is now, okay, how do you get yourself prepared? Like, how do you get yourself ready? Or do you basically be the same problem for future generations? Are you going to be the same, 10, 15 years from now when your students are sitting in Raul's class and I'm video conferencing in and we look exactly the same because we just naturally have this beauty, so 10, 15 years from now, are your future students sitting in this class and in this discussion and they're saying, no, my teachers didn't prepare me for what the future is going to be like. And so the question is like, what do we do? And that's why we see MOOCs be a very valuable resource. That's why we see people sign up for like coding clubs and other learning activities outside. You go get your own trainings, you get certifications outside. We see a lot of people going back to school and getting more and more degrees and getting more student loans to try and make themselves better. And it's not doing anything, in my opinion. I think, there is an opportunity to change things through the use of technology, but it's basically rethinking that paradigm. But the question really is like, what does the future look like and how are we getting our students prepared for that? And for the most part, we're just doing a lot of the same thing.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. And again, the battle for this week, this class happens with this conference call happens in the middle of our unit on material design.
Yep.
Yesterday, we were having a conversation about what does it mean in the case of a language class to talk about authentic materials.
Mm-hmm.
I know the discussion we had on Monday, we had on Tuesday, in the sense that in language education or in language teaching, The traditional idea is that an authentic material is a material that is not made for class. But it's material that is made for and by native speakers.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about how difficult that is problematic because it means we're saying that the class is fake.
Yeah.
I remember we actually talked about how in many cases teaching is very similar to wrestling.
Yeah.
In the sense of it's as real or fake as you want it to be.
Yeah.
And I think personally at this particular point, I'm just recalling that famous article by Donna Alperman and Maggie Haywood about wrestling. I mean, this popped in my mind. That particular piece. And I think with technology, and I think that's the challenge for them when it comes to design, even creating and refining materials.
Yeah.
How we use technology to make language more realistic and get people to really appropriate language and simply consume, because I think that's what is, the question of why we're using technology, it cannot simply be for consumption.
Yeah.
There has to be a point where we start producing technology.
Yeah.
Producing content. And I think the language class has to become a producer of content as opposed to a mere consumer, which is what we have right now.
Definitely agree. I think that we see a lot of the same thing with technology. We see a lot of the same thing with tech in regards to most people don't understand it. Most people don't get instructional technologies or educational technologies. I think about it and write about it a little bit too much, but I think that most people just don't get it. And the challenge is that other people look at your use of technology for teaching, learning, and assessment, and if they don't get it, then they question and they think that teaching and learning and assessment's not happening. Because we're all friends here, the same thing is happening at my institution now, where I was told that my use of technology in my classes was too far ahead of everybody and too progressive, and that quite simply, my colleagues and my administration and my supervisors, they thought I didn't know how to teach because I'm too far ahead of everybody else. And so you see a situation where if you have a class where you all have a blog or you have a website and you're reading and you're blogging over time and you're journaling and you're editing wikis and stuff like that, if you hand that syllabus or your class materials to a colleague, I've had colleagues say, "Where's the midterm and where's the final?" And I'm like, "There is none." And they're like, "Why don't you have a midterm and final?" And I'm like, "Because they're stupid. Like they don't capture anything." And they're like, "Well, how do you know students are learning?" And I said, "Look at their journaling, look at their writing, look at the stuff they created, look at their wikis, look at the way they edit and revise, look at the metacognitive skills, look at how they have knowledge construction. The one thing that we never can do in our classroom is knowledge construction. They're doing that." And then the colleagues and the reviewers still don't get it. And so that's part of the challenge that we have is a lot of people just don't get what this could look like. And that's part of the challenge that we have as we get out there and we explore and we build and break stuff.
Yeah, and actually that actually makes me think the whole issue of assessment. And actually I was just having a conversation with the class that one of the STEM poetry, I just told him we're gonna have to wait. I'm gonna post an initial grade, kind of like you did it, but that's not the full grade because I'm with two of my researchers, we're putting together a new model of rubric.
Yep.
Or that it's more multimodal in its mindset, because it doesn't make any sense. And here's the problem with assessment, because sometimes it's very linear. And I have them make videos where some of them do performance. I have students here some of them decided to make videos. Yeah. Performing, some of them actually were acting out and doing like full-fledged performances. Different kinds of things happen. But if I'm going to use a traditional assessment, then ultimately what I'm going to be looking at is how do they, whether they pronounced everything properly.
Yeah.
And grammar mistakes. I'm like, it's a slam point. They're supposed to be, it doesn't matter. It's a slam
No. See, but that's the thing is, you get paid millions of dollars a year to make sure that everybody in that room gets A's, B's, C's, D's, and F's. That's all you get paid millions of dollars for. And so the challenge is, you know, if you want to drive that Ferrari into work every day, you got to give out those A's, B's, C's, D's, F's. And the thing is, if a student signs up for your class, the students in that room are probably just like the students that I have. They show up and they want to read, they want to do the midterm, they want to do the final. I can tune in and out through the semester, and then I'm done.
Well, hold on. I need to ask that question right now. Do you really want me to do the traditional thing?
Yes, you really want that.
Do you?
But then the challenge is that there is frustration. I mean, this group is obviously incredible. It's not that way, but I see a lot of students that they are frustrated because what you're doing is not the way that you do school. There are certain expectations of the way that you do school. Like, you're the teacher, you tell me what to do, I learn, I regurgitate it on a test, and then we move to the next chapter. And if you're in there saying, hey, we're all co-learners and we're going to make videos and stuff, the students are like, whoa, this is not what I signed up for. I want the person that I can do a midterm and a final and just read, and that's it. So there's certain expectations about the way that you do school. And I think that sometimes if we're a bit progressive, we break those models, and that can be problematic. And technology usually fits in there, but there's other critical pedagogies that also can do the job.
Actually, let's listen to the part. That last sentence. What do you mean by that?
I think there's other, I think you could be more progressive and more meaningful, more authentic as an educator by integrating other critically relevant pedagogies. You could create learning opportunities that make learning worthwhile, more authentic, more effective, more inconvenient for your students. You could create learning opportunities that make them think about their own bias and their perspective and make your students feel uncomfortable in the classroom. I think the only way that we, one of my favorite words in my whole bag of tricks as an educator is cognitive dissonance. I think that cognitive dissonance is really about holding two different ideas in your head at the same time and being comfortable with the two of them. There's also this mentality of sometimes you're going to learn things in the classroom and sometimes you're going to experience things in life that there is no right or wrong answer. I think culturally here in the US, we have a problem with that right now. We have a problem holding two different ideas in our head at the same time. A lot of my friends and family have an issue with there is one right answer and that it's part of my tribe or my political party, and they don't see anything else. So I think there is an opportunity to build that sort of learning into your classroom, build in culturally, critically relevant pedagogies that may or may not use technology. You can teach an incredible class that makes students uncomfortable. You know, you can have Socratic seminars where they really dig deep and they're not going to have that midterm final and you don't use technology at all. But then you can also do the same thing and integrate tech. So I think that you can be progressive and you can push the boundaries and you can make people really think, which my hope is that kids leave our classrooms and they are thinkers. You can do that with or without technology.
Sorry, I was just writing one question because I like that part you said, and I just wrote on the board. How ready are you to make your students uncomfortable?
Yeah.
And I mean, and I don't mean I get uncomfortable in the what I'm not. I mean, in the right way. I'm not talking about uncomfortable in the Weinstein kind of way. I'm talking about mentally uncomfortable. In the sense of not getting used to the traditional or always expecting the traditional stuff. Yes, so yeah, somebody finally decided to jump in.
For example, when you start out comfortable, tell someone about the experience they had when I was in ninth grade with a professor, a teacher who gave us only copies of workshops, and then she said like, let's do a platform in Jito, and then I will upload the workshops in Jito. You have to create a platform, and you have to upload your tasks in Jito and what technology. So, so is that technology or is not? Because really, that for me was the motivation for nothing. Because it was able to change the paper for the web. So sometimes it happens that professors only change the paper for the web. So
Yeah.
how is different that? Because sometimes I have problems trying to identify that and how to enhance students' motivation in the web. Because it's like if you have to upload something, it's quite the difference to giving the teacher in paper.
Can you restate a little bit of that role?
Yeah, so basically what's the debate. So the question comes down to what happens when you have teachers who simply are, I mean, because Sebastian, he was talking about how teacher just gave him handouts and then they have to upload the handouts to a platform.
Yeah.
So, and how is that technology, quote unquote?
I don't think it is, but that's the thing to keep in mind is that I'm the person that does the workshop, and teachers, you know, I go give workshops, and teachers that are like very traditional teachers, they hate me at the beginning. They're like, you know, you're a techno geek, or because you get past people's paradigms about what teaching and learning is. And so I think when we get teachers started, my goal as a facilitator, as a guide, is to say, okay, let's find one small way that you can integrate technology. If your small way is, I'm going to take my worksheets and I'm going to put it up on a website. I'm going to upload my worksheet to a Dropbox, you know, or you probably have like an online learning management system there, like Blackboard or something. So a lot of faculty, they're like, we say, how to use technology, and faculty say, well, I upload my worksheets to Blackboard. And it's like, oh, awesome. To me, that's not technology. That's just a distribution. Or we ask faculty, like, how do you use technology? And they say, I use PowerPoint. And I'm like, no, that's not technology use to me. Like, it doesn't cut it. But for some people, they have to start there. Like, you have to, this is all zone and proximal development. This is scaffolding of learners. You don't say, you know, okay, I blog and I use webinars and I use screencasts. You know, when students in my class have a question, I do a YouTube video and I share it out to them and to everybody online. When I tell my colleagues that I do that, they look at me like I'm crazy. And maybe I am, but my thinking is, if they have a question, chances are a colleague of mine or another student in another classroom is also going to have that same question. So why not just put it out there and let it fly? But if we think about scaffolding and zone and proximal development and that SAMR model that I talked about before, you know, you might be here and your expectations for technology use and my expectations might be here, but you've got somebody that, you know, we all have those friends and family, and we might be those people that you ask them, like, what's your password to Apple, or your password for your iPhone, or your password to log into Facebook or MySpace or, you know, eHarmony, whatever it is. Like, what's your password? And they're like, like my dad's that way. I'm like, what's your password? And he's like just rattling off numbers and names. And I'm like, do you have a system for your passwords, Dad? And he's like getting mad and frustrated. I can't talk to somebody like that about, like, hey, Google Docs or your student should edit Wikipedia. Like, you can't have that sort of discussion. So I think we should expect more. I think we need, the answer to that is we need teachers that are sitting in pre-service programs now, we need you to think critically and creatively about instructional technologies. And we need you to go into K-12 environments and beyond that. And we need you to re-examine pedagogy. We need you to problematize pedagogy. We need you to not assume that good teaching and learning is what good teaching and learning has always been. We need you to sit in classes and think about teaching, learning, and assessment and think critically and say, yes, but is this still true? You know, is this still true? Are these thought processes, are these pedagogies, are these theoretical perspectives still true for these new times and future times? And we need you to question that. We need you to question when you're sitting in a class and the professor gives you worksheets and then one day they're like, hey, I got my evaluations and I need more technology, so I put my worksheets up on Dropbox. You're like, no, that doesn't cut it. Like, we need more. To go back to my son, the second grader, he's not a digital native, but he has certain expectations for the way that he would like to learn. He watches YouTube videos. He plays Minecraft. He codes. He the other day he sat in on my poetry slam class and he used Toontastic to make animated movies in Toontastic, and he recorded the audio of me and recorded the audio of my students talking and added that audio into the animated movie while he's sitting there. He's 7. So when the class was done after 45 minutes to an hour, he showed us a video of the movie he made of my class as the class was happening. And we all sat there like, how did you do that? And so think about that sort of kid. If that kid sits into a classroom where there's a second or a third grade teacher and the teacher's like, here's a worksheet, my son's gonna be like, no. Or, hey, let's just read this book and answer this worksheet. My son's not gonna like it. And there's a lot of people like my son that I think that there's a different way in which they learn. There are expectations for different modes of information. And when we walk in and we say, hey, I got this nice worksheet and look, it's online now, your learner's going to be like, no, you're outdated, you're antiquated, this doesn't help me at all.
Right.
How much time do I got?
Well, I think we're gonna, this is 11:30 and I'm really concerned about the recording time because this is the free Zoom, only have an hour, but the class is almost over. So,
how much time do you got left for me?
well, we can start wrapping it up.
Okay, because I was going to give everybody a challenge.
The challenge, and I'll make sure they interact. I'll give them your contact so they can interact with you.
All right, cool.
So, everybody's ready for the challenge again.
You ready for challenge? All right. This is going to take me a little bit of time to speak, but I'll speak quickly. Do I got like 5 minutes?
Yeah.
All right. So I will share screen, and I will share this screen here. And so this is a Google slide deck. I had this out there available online. Does this show the full slide deck? Right now it should say, does that show the full slide?
Yes.
All right. So over the last couple months, I've been going out to workshops and working with teachers, and I've been trying to make the case that we're not doing our job in terms of technology instruction. And so what I want to do is I want to challenge all of you. I'm going to skip past all the argument part because we've already had that. But one of the things I want to talk about is, and this, Raul can share all this. This is a keynote, a talk I've given. I have video of this out there. But what I see is that when we talk about technology use, when we talk about digital literacy, new literacy, there's a lot of different things out there. There's a lot of different things going on all at the same time. And the challenge is that all it does is it serves to confuse us. It makes it hard to understand what is real instructional technology or educational technology, like what really counts. And so it's hard for us to figure out like what's in and what's out. So if I have worksheets, I put up on a website, does that count? You know, if I turn it into a Google Doc, is that now instructional tech? So all we do is we get confused about what counts and what does not. What I do is I'm a believer in first principles thinking. First principles thinking basically says if we winnow down big ideas into simple concepts, then all of the other things will make sense. So if you focus on certain basic elements or first principles, all of the other stuff will fit in and normally happen. We see this is getting hot again with like Elon Musk and others that subscribe to first principles thinking. So when I think about first principles thinking, what I suggest is if you want to say that you're authentically, effectively using technology in instruction, if you want to say that you are embedding educational technologies, instructional technologies, whatever you want to call it, into your classroom, I see there being a series of stages or a continuum. And I see it being in consumption, curation, and creation. And so what I'm going to challenge all of you to do is forget the kids that you're going to have in the future. I want to see how you can embed this into your own work and your own processes, okay? So if we look at this, the first of them is consumption. The good news is we already do this. We do this all day, every day. The recent Pew Internet Research report says that 1/3 of Americans are always online. We never step away from the internet or other digital texts and tools. Some research also suggests that we spend about 7.5 to 8 hours per day multitasking. So kids that are in our classrooms or not in our classrooms are almost always online consuming content. The question is, are we thinking critically about that content? So we're just consuming content every day, all day, but are we thinking deeply about what it really means and what's behind it? So here's my challenge to you. I want you to identifying ways to be a more critical consumer of information. Yes, in your future classroom with your future kids, think about how they can be more critical consumers, but how can you be a more critical consumer? Do you read multiple sites? Do you realize that when you search for something on Google, there is a second page to Google? Most of my students don't understand that Google search has a second page and it doesn't go beyond one page. Do you bookmark and archive your thinking over time? Do you have a blog where you document and archive your thinking? Also, you can use a tool like I do called Hypothesis, where we create an annotated layer on the web. The second thing that I look at is curation. So the challenge when we have these digital texts and tools is there is always change that's out there. There is a steady fire hose of information. There's just tons of content and we don't know where to stop, start, begin, end. We don't know different tools, what's appropriate, what's not. And the challenge is we don't know how to make sense of that. The good news is that there's already a lot of people out there that are actively curating content. There is a culture of expertise that's out there. Is anybody in the room a user of Pinterest?
I am.
Yeah. So those of you that use Pinterest, what you're doing is you're actively looking through all of the information online and you are creating boards and you're saying, okay, I'm an expert in instructional technologies or language pedagogies, or I'm an expert in fine Italian handbags or CrossFit activities. I'm an expert in tattoos or vegan foods. Whatever your expertise is in, you actively look at the information online and say, okay, this stuff is the good stuff. This stuff, all this other stuff is the garbage. And so your boards, you're actively curating, you're collecting and curating content. There is a culture of expertise, and there you're basically, as a more informed other, you're trying to make sense of that. One way that I do that is I weekly do a newsletter where I collect the stuff of the week, the information of the week that you should know about. And so it's a way for me to like push pause and say, here's the important stuff. And it helps me synthesize and think about my own field, but I also have a lot of other teachers and colleagues and friends. They also do that. Once a week, they just sit and synthesize and say, here's what I learned this week, and here's why it's important. So I challenge all of you to think about content curation. Think about, once again, start a blog, start a website, start actively curating content. Archive your thinking over time. take a little bit of time and look at your digital identity. Look at your cyber infrastructure. Look at where you live online. What are the different places that you live online? When you get out there and you will apply for that teaching job and someone searches for you or Googles you, what do they find? Okay, are you happy with what they find? Do they find only parts of your identity? Do they find the good parts of your identity? So part of that is like creating that trail of breadcrumbs. The last thing, and for me, it's the most important, the most interesting. Once again, this is a continuum, but I don't think you progress from one to the other end of the spectrum. I think that all of this can happen iteratively. That means we can go in and out of these different lenses. The last for me is creation. As a language arts teacher, as a reading teacher, I loved it when I could have my students create and build, and they could write, and they could be imaginative. We could use our imagination and create new worlds and create things. The cool thing is with technology, we have supercomputers in our pockets. We can do incredible things. We can pull out our devices and make stop motion movies. I can send all of you out of the building now and say, go take 3 pictures of examples of text that you find out in the world and tweet them back to me. We can do incredible things, but the challenge is we have to think about, what is this content that really sticks? What makes a difference? What's the stuff out there that really gets our kids excited? And for the most part, we see a lot of digital graffiti. We see a lot of, no offense to Star Wars, love Star Wars. No offense to cat videos, love cat videos. But what is informed use of this? What can we really do with these great tools and with these great texts? So the challenge for all of you is think about how you can be content creators online. How can you build? How many of you already build? Do you have YouTube videos and you want to have a podcast? Are there musicians in the room? Do you share stuff online? Your slam poetry pieces, are those already online? What else do you share online? Do you code? Do you program? Are you in Minecraft? Are you a maker? Do you do LED makes? Do you knit? Do you sew? Do you write? How do you create and how do you put this content online? And last but not least, I'll go back to having that website and having that digital presence and creating your one spot, a domain of your own online. Christy Pytash and I wrote a piece in JAWL that Raul and you all can take a look at and read and hate us. But we make the case that we need to start creating, we need to give kids in elementary school, in preschool, first grade, second grade, we need to give them a website and have them build that website up over time. Because if we're going to talk about building digital literacies, we need to build digital literacies in a digitally literate environment. We can't do stuff make-believe, or we can't have those worksheets and stuff like that. So once again, we're talking about different lenses, consumption, curation, creation, you building up those skill sets, and then we'll work on it later. And what I'll leave you with is, at the end of the day, this is really all about power. This is about not only you having the power, being able to control your future. We know that literacy always is about power. We know that language is always about power. And you and your students are the next wave of individuals that is going to take over the internet. Think deeply about that. Don't ever forget the power that you are giving your learners as they join this global marketplace.
Right. Well, with that, I think we really have to end it up today. But Ian, thank you so much. I think these guys and these lovely ladies in the class have a lot of things to think about, a lot of things to continue reflecting on in their path to teaching. So I really appreciate having you here. I was telling the students, I made a little note on the blackboard, kind of saying, this is what a webinar looks like, because I just told them this is completely unscripted.
Yeah.
Scripted is. It simply happened. Ian, I wanted to come to my class. I just thought the question I wrote the syllabus, and the question I gave it. And everything that happened today was completely unscripted. There was no dialogue, which is something we like to do often. And tomorrow we have actually another one. We'll have a chat happen in the morning. The topic, we haven't figured out the topic, but we will figure out the topic by the time we get on Zoom. Yeah, we do that something called the OSC chats, so you're gonna see those on the internet, so you can follow the work of the Russian academics. So Ian, once again, thank you so much, and I think Ian talks with purposes of nice.
Hey, don't be strangers. Don't be a stranger. I mean, my contact info is out there. I'm all over the internet. I'm all over the good and the bad places. You know, send me a note. Don't be a stranger. It would be fun to do this again, but have a couple people tune in like via Hangout so we can have a real discussion. You know, and as you have questions, part of this is also like as you have questions that come up over time, feel free to shoot me a note because I'm still studying this as well. And it's not just me. There are people far smarter and far better looking than I that you could talk to about all this.
All right, so thank you so much, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Adios.
Adios.